Hi everybody, thanks for joining me here for this lesson on cross-functional teams. We're going to start this lesson by asking the question, what is a cross-functional team? And to answer that question, we're going to take a look at an organizational hierarchy. In this hierarchy, you can see we start with the CEO at the top, and then below the CEO we have a variety of different departments. We have an accounting department, an operations department, a marketing department, and an information technology department. Now, what I want you to do here is I want you to imagine that we took one employee from each one of those departments and we put them together on a team to solve a problem. That would be an example of what we would call a cross-functional team. And the idea behind cross-functional teams is that we bring together people with different backgrounds and different knowledge bases so that they can look at a problem from different perspectives and help us solve it differently than we would have if we had only brought in people with one type of background. So where did cross-functional teams come from? The first documented cross-functional teams were formed in the 1950s by a company we know of today as Northwestern Mutual. And the problem that they were trying to solve at that point in time dealt with the impact of computers on business. Northwestern Mutual saw that computers were entering the marketplace. They could see that they were going to have some type of impact on the business that they were doing, but they weren't sure what that impact was going to be. And they wanted to prepare for that, so they brought together a group that consisted of people from their financial departments, people from their investment departments, their actuarial departments, and then a few other departments as well. And the idea was that they brought these people together, formed a cross-functional team to investigate this problem so that they could develop a plan for Northwestern Mutual to move forward utilizing computers in their business. Because Northwestern Mutual did such a good job putting together this cross-functional team, they had a competitive advantage in this area for quite a while. Now, other companies saw this happen and got on board with the concept of cross-functional teams, and particularly in the 1970s and 1980s, we saw a lot of growth in terms of using cross-functional teams in business. So when we look at modern cross-functional teams, what we tend to see a lot of today are people with data analytics backgrounds coming together and working with people with business backgrounds and other people with technology backgrounds, and they're looking to solve problems related to building data-driven cultures and creating data-driven organizations. And the reason these three groups of people tend to come together is that people with data analytics backgrounds obviously understand how to work with and manage data, but they don't always know the problems that the business needs to solve. So that's where our people with business backgrounds come in. They start raising questions about the problems that need to be solved so that they can brainstorm with the data analytics people as to how data can be used to solve those problems. But neither one of them is fully aware of what all the technological capabilities of the organization are, and that's why they need people with technology backgrounds in these cross-functional teams as well. We're also seeing cross-functional teams emerge during times of crisis. So for example, during the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, Gap put together a cross-functional team that was designed to help hospitals procure resources for PPE and other products that they needed for doctors and nurses in the hospital. Now, all this positive talk about cross-functional teams may make them sound fantastic, and they can be, but they are not magically effective. Okay? In fact, an article in the Harvard Business Review reports that 75% of cross-functional teams are actually dysfunctional. And the dysfunction is identified in a variety of places. For example, an inability to stick to a budget or a schedule or to meet specifications that were put out for the cross-functional team. There are also challenges with meeting customer expectations, as well as making sure that the cross-functional team stays aligned with corporate goals. Now, what was the root cause of all this dysfunction? According to the article, the number one cause was that team members were skipping meetings. Now, that sounds like a very simple fix, so let's take a look at what was recommended for fixing this dysfunctionality. The first was to put together a cross-functional portfolio governance team, otherwise known as a PGT. Now, what a PGT is, it's essentially a higher level cross-functional team. So we'll take people from executive levels that deal with different functionalities, so maybe an executive over finance, an executive over technology, and so on and so forth, and they'll have high-level oversight of the cross-functional team. The cross-functional team will not report to them in terms of day-to-day operations, but they will report out periodically so that the PGT has feedback and input on what the cross-functional team is doing. Next, we have to make sure that we have an accountable leader. I don't know if there are any fans of the movie The Incredibles out there, but there's a great line in The Incredibles where Syndrome, the villain, says that he's trying to make everybody super because when everybody's super, nobody will be. Well, we have the same issue with accountability in organizations. When everybody is accountable, nobody's accountable. So even though our cross-functional team consists of a variety of employees from the same hierarchical level within the organization, we need to have somebody in that cross-functional team who can be a leader and be accountable for their performance in order to ensure that they do stay on budget and stay on schedule and so on and so forth. Okay, we need to have clear goals, resources, and deadlines for the cross-functional team. They need to know what target it is that they're aiming at. We also need to make sure that we're clear that project success is your main objective. So if you are a person who's in that team from marketing, your main objective isn't to make sure you come out with the best marketing plan, it's to make sure that you come out with the best overall plan for the project. Okay, and then finally, we need to make sure that we're continually reevaluating a project. Okay, we need to make sure that project is continually aligned with what the organization's goals are. So often, cross-functional teams become teams that are managing what we call pet projects, projects that get started and eventually should become abandoned, but don't get abandoned, which is why we need to make sure that we're reevaluating them, because if the project turns out to be a bad project, the team can't possibly be effective. Okay, some other recommendations for helping cross-functional teams succeed come from McKinsey & Company, and these recommendations are related to taking the framing of organizations traditionally and changing it so that it matches cross-functional teams. So, for example, knowledge guarding is very common in organizations. Knowledge is a source of power, it can be a source of status, so employees aren't always willing to share all of the knowledge that they have. But we need to move beyond this and transition to a culture of knowledge sharing if our cross-functional teams are going to be successful. Next, we need to look at department KPIs or key performance indicators. So we often have key performance indicators for accounting departments and operational departments and marketing departments and engineering departments and so on. But our members of our cross-functional teams cannot be concerned only with their own departments. So we need to put together key performance indicators for the cross-functional teams as well. Okay, finally, we need to take our simple goals that are traditionally targets for our departments, and we need to make them more complex so that they take into account everything that the cross-functional team should be able to do. The idea of bringing a cross-functional team together is that by bringing people from different units together, we should be able to achieve higher goals, and our goals need to reflect that. Okay. The next piece we're going to talk about here is we need to make sure we have the right members for our cross-functional team. And we're going to look at this through social identity theory. Now, social identity is essentially the extent to which a person sees themselves as being connected to a group or a trait. Okay, and the first aspect of social identity that we're going to look at is what we call functional social identity. Now, this is how well you identify with the success of those who perform a role similar to you. So, for example, if you are an engineer, do you identify with the success of other engineers? When other engineers succeed, do you feel like you've succeeded? Do you feel like your success is something that helps all engineers? And what they found in this research published in the Academy of Management Journal was that when members of cross-functional teams had high functional social identity, they tended to have higher team member performance. And the explanation for this is that when you believe that the success of others is dependent upon your own success, you are going to be focused more on making sure the group that you're contributing to is successful. The next component we're going to look at to social identity is personal social identity. Now, this is an example of how well you identify with your functional role. So if we go back to the engineer example, this isn't about identifying with other engineers, but this is about identifying with being an engineer. And what they found in this research was that the higher the personal social identity of cross-functional team members, the lower their team member performance. And the explanation for this is that when individuals within the cross-functional teams identified with their actual functional roles, they were more focused on making sure that their functional roles were met within the team than making sure that the team performed at the level it needed to perform. Now, this gets even a little more complex with the personal social identity, because what they also saw, if you take a look at this graph here, is that they saw that the effect of personal social identity on performance as a team member was also dependent upon whether or not someone's personal identity was the majority or minority in a team. So, for example, if you were an engineer and the majority of the team was engineers, your personal social identity level didn't really have a great impact on your performance as a team member. But if you were an engineer and there were very few engineers on the team, as your personal social identity increased, your performance tended to decrease in this study. All right. So next, we're going to move forward and talk about perceptions and performance through some research that was published in the Journal of Business and Psychology. And what they found in this article is the two things that they looked at that were most important were perceived support and leader behaviors. And for perceived support, this refers to the cross-functional team members' perceptions that the organization is providing the resources that they needed and the moral support that they needed. The leader behaviors pertain to whether or not the leaders encourage team members to set high expectations for themselves. And what they found were when leaders encourage team members to set high expectations and perceived support was high, there tended to be better team commitment within cross-functional teams, and that these higher levels of team commitment tend to lead to better team performance. So to summarize our lesson here on cross-functional teams, there's a few takeaways that I want to make sure that you've got here. First, cross-functional teams bring together team members of the same level of hierarchy with various functional backgrounds within an organization. Okay, they can lead to stronger idea generation and more in-depth understanding of problems because of the various perspectives that they bring. They were first introduced in the 1950s, and we really saw their growth in the 70s and 80s. Okay, they tend to be used in a variety of different situations, but they must be carefully managed in order to be successful. So I want to thank you again for joining us here for this lesson on cross-functional teams. We'll talk to you soon.